Welcome to the second program in our series with Bob Tapp on humanism. Bob?
Nice to be here. Nice to be here.
And Bob, I heard you yesterday encouraging people to use their intelligence, their reason in politics and health and so on, but this has resulted in things like the anti-vaccine movement. What do you think of that? How do you control for that?
Well, you don't control for that. I suppose you say, is it really good science to avoid a vaccine which has been shown to reduce this kind of pain or this kind of disease? Or to claim without any real evidence that there's something dangerous also inserted in this which will hurt your children.
But they've seen it in print.
Well, they've seen it on the web.
On the web?
They've heard it. They've seen it in their social media, you see. Unless we do a better job, a much better job than we've done in our public education of teaching, the word for it now is critical skills.
Critical skills.
Yeah. Unless we do a better job of doing that, people won't know what to pick off the web because everything is there.
Yeah.
And this is true around the world. Everybody's got access to the web. And you have to learn to be a little careful in what you screen. Now, in the old days, there were some library shelves you probably just walked by. Mm-hmm. You know, that shelf on Magic over there. And it's very interesting that the humanists, we're just back, as you know, from some conferences at Oxford in England on world humanism. But the humanists have often hired skeptics to help people become more critical in their thinking. And they've often hired magicians to help people because, well, you know, there was that wonderful guy who could bend spoons, you see, mentally.
Yes.
It was said, until you had a magician come along and bend spoons. And that sort of, there are still people who believe it happens, that it can be done by extrasensory perceptions and so on. But at least potentially you've reduced the non-science, potentially.
Well, that seems to be happening as some people are grasping a scientific approach to life. And wasn't it Steven Pinker, the Better Angels of Our Natures?
Yes, which is a very large book, but a very readable book and a terribly important book. Just out.
Why violence has gone down?
Yeah, because most of us say we live in the most violent century in human history. Look at World War II and look at the Stalin's death camps and look at what Hitler did, you see, in the Holocaust. It's terrible. Now, if you come at it a little more scientifically, as Pinker does, and say, how many of every 100,000 people in the population at any given point in time die from violence? You suddenly discover the reverse is true. Fewer die from violence now than any previous time in human history.
Most people would be amazed by that.
Sure. And Pinker's book is based on that, and not just saying, mapping it, you see, there's less violence now, getting into the more serious question any good scientist would do, which Pinker is, why? How? How can this have happened? What are the things that led to the reduction of violence? I was startled by one of the figures he pulls out. For several centuries, if you were a royal male, you know, a prince of some kind or a noble of some kind, 25% of you would die from some kind of violence.
Wow.
Well, you know, you get insulted by somebody and we're out there with our swords the next day or our pistols, we're dueling.
Yeah.
We're dueling. And so 25% of us are going to die out of that kind of violence.
Hug.
Now, that's a small part of the population.
I'm glad we've stopped dueling.
Yeah, that's a small part of the population.
Yeah.
But what Pinker goes on to say, and he credits Immanuel Kant with an enormous push in this in the 18th century Enlightenment, saying nations have to learn to negotiate with each other instead of immediately going to wars. Now, we still haven't. Our UN has a lot of weaknesses.
Yeah.
The League of Nations had many more. You see, we have slowly evolved a little bit. I was going to say we've learned to distinguish between armies and police forces. police forces presumably bring people to justice,
Yeah.
to a court where they can get the argument settled that way instead of with guns. But if we look at the last few months on our televisions, we've militarized our police in far too many places.
Yeah, Ferguson,
far-
Missouri.
Yeah, Ferguson being a good example. And the billions of dollars of military equipment, tanks and things that have been given by the Pentagon to police forces in America is a scary, not too well-known fact that those of us who want to aude sapere, have to not only look at, but get people to take seriously.
Aude sapere, the Latin for be audacious.
Dare to be intelligent instead of just believing what the television tells you.
Yeah.
Or wherever you get your news, the social media you see, or I dip into the internet. Oh, the internet's wonderful. I can dip into it and find anything.
Assertion of anything.
Just about. So
Magic.
you have to learn to be critical, it's not only do you read newspapers, but which newspapers do you read?
Yeah.
Or which radio stations or TV stations do you listen to? Are they all equally good, bad?
No.
I think I'd be inclined to say they're all kind of neutral. Infotainment is a word that I think is useful to use. But the question of...
They're not all equal.
Oh, no. And see, I've been reading a wonderful book on anti-intelligence in America by Susan Jacoby, just out. I urge everybody to take a look at that.
Anti-intelligence in America.
Yeah, the story of America. But she's saying, she's picking up Hofstadter's book, which was about anti-intellectualism in America, and arguing that it's heavily on the increase. More and more of us don't believe in evolution.
Really?
More and more of us don't believe that humans have anything to do with this miserable climate change we're experiencing. They just say, well, nature goes up and down, and you see,
that is so wrong.
it is hard to find a serious scientist who would say that's correct. However, think back on the last contest for presidency. One of our parties, the only one of, I think it was 7 candidates at the time, who said maybe humans have something to do with this, was thrown out immediately.
Ooh.
So we have a whole political party where all of its candidates say that's not science. Now that's serious.
That is.
And when you begin to get even more serious and use not only science but critical thinking to explore not only what you do and feel was right to do, but what the results of it are.
Well, you've spoken about the ledger of religion.
Right.
This is relevant here, isn't it?
Well, I wasn't even into religions then. I was thinking about the let me stay for a minute with the legacy of politics. How many Muslim militants does each drone strike create? Well, I mean, that's a countable number. And at a certain point, you have to say, this is counterproductive, you see. Every time we send one of those things, we get 10 more guys as enemies. Well, if you killed my kids with a drone from somewhere out there, I would not be very happy with you.
I would be.
And if you then occupied my country and said, I'm going to save you, I'd be very dubious what you were bringing to me.
Yeah.
We were at this wonderful World Congress of Humanists in Oxford last month, and
in August of 2014.
2014, and this meets every 3 years. And the focus there was on freedom. And when you think of what the Danish cartoons, now not all of them were even done by local Danes, those famous cartoons that started killing around the world.
That angered Muslims, some
Muslims. They were used for all kinds of things, anti-Westernism, etc. Some of the worst cartoons, as a matter of fact, were inserted by activists to make the whole pile even worse. But apart from that,
activists what? You mean people who were trying to enrage.
As far as we can tell, activist Muslims said, as long as we're going to send out these 10, let's add a couple more that are really offensive to say why we're offended. Yeah. Now, you know, history's got to sort that out. But whether it was 10 or 12 is irrelevant. The point is, do religions have a special exemption? And this was the theme of the conference, from being attacked, insulted, criticized. Politicians don't. Why should religious people be exempt from the same kind of critical analysis we give to politicians and to social movements?
Because they're sacred?
Well, that's often the argument. That's often the argument. And when we look at our world and its history, it's so fascinating to see. For instance, there are all kinds of charts you can get if you look carefully on the web. The relationship between levels of science education and levels of political ignorance. They're very scary, or political ignorance isn't quite the right word. Living more in the past. You know, when we talked before, I was mentioning this wonderful phrase of Phil Kitcher's about progress from.
Yes.
What are the things that may have been in their time even good and progressive that we now have to go beyond? Mm-hmm. And if we just look at American history, what we have been able to do here in understanding the range of sexual orientations that Americans have, that humans have, and that includes Americans, of course, our treatment of people until almost yesterday of saying, if you're different, get in the closet and stay there. We've suddenly begun to say to people, you see, is that true for your family? Anybody? Why should people be in the closet? Why shouldn't they be as free to marry as you are? We've got 20 states that have now legalized same-sex marriage. Now, this doesn't mean that a same-sex couple can walk down the street of those states and nobody's going to spit on them or turn their backs on them or worse. No, it doesn't mean that at all. But it means that we have progressed from a homophobic stage to a much more accepting stage. We have progressed from a stage of saying women belong in the kitchen. Remember the 3 German Ks, the Kinter, Kilke. But we still only give them 70% of the salary that men have in the same job. There are a whole series of things we have to progress from.
Yeah.
And the reason I started with the violence in Kitcher, and not Kitcher, and Pinker, was we have to progress from our idea that violence is productive, that violence solves problems. We've got so many examples of where violence creates problems or exaggerates problems. And we have, as I was coming out of the Navy in World War II, one of the people that caught my attention because I was starting to study India was Gandhi. Mm-hmm. You see, and then as I came to know Gandhi better, I realized one of the things that had influenced him was Thoreau.
Really?
Henry David Thoreau.
Of Walden?
Of Walden and of Emerson and of Concord right here in this country. He was a rebel against our Mexican War. He said, don't go. Now, that was pretty brave. That was pretty brave in his time. Did you see this wonderful attempt to block a boat coming in to Massachusetts Harbor? These 2 guys rented a lobster boat and they blocked the pier. And they were indicted, of course, for upsetting everything. But the most wonderful part was they called their boat the Henry David T boat. They didn't spell out Thoreau, but Henry David, you see, they renamed the boat. The most wonderful thing was, when this was on television just a week ago, the DA who was charging them with upsetting the peace and so on withdrew the charges because they were trying to stop a load of coal coming into the harbor. And the DA said they're right in terms of what's happening to climate from burning coal. So I'm dropping all the charges.
Wow.
So, and a lot of people saw this on television. The 2 guys, One of them happened to be, I think he was a Quaker sailmaker, I think. Wonderful guys. They were articulate. You see why we did this, why we assumed we were going to be arrested. And the DA who said, well, I had to arrest him at first, but then I realized I couldn't do it because what, science had informed me? Or because I realized the kind of violence we use against people, locking up people is pretty violent, doesn't make sense, especially if they're right.
Yes.
Yeah. So the Pinker book documenting how we have moved from a terribly violent past into a less violent present, and how we can move toward a even less violent future. And he keeps going back to Kant. You see, we've got to use the United Nations not as a military force, kill the bad guys, but as a force. Why are these people attacking these people, and how do we separate them, and how do we negotiate their differences and reduce the amount of violence, reduce the number of people killed by violence?
There's progress I've seen in the Minnesota legislature, the Minnesota government this year, in anti-bullying bill. That will reduce violence.
Absolutely.
It will reduce suicides. It will reduce the terrible distortion that results from that bullying of people's lives.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And so, in a way, we're writing another chapter for Steven Pinker's book.
Oh yes, oh yes.
Of anti-bullying in the public schools.
Yeah. Now, this Congress, by the way, gave the International Humanist of the Year award to Wole Soyinka, a name that may not be that familiar, but many of us read his novels. He's a Nigerian who's been under attack almost all of his life for his freedom of ideas and for his criticism of violence, and for his criticism particularly of unintelligent violence. After all, in Nigeria, they're still claiming some people are witches.
Really?
Killing them for that. Christians and Muslims are at each other. It's a pretty violent country.
Yes.
It's a pretty violent country. And here he is getting this award and making a fantastic speech, which can be looked up on the web. If you go to the International Humanist, if you go to the World Humanist Congress, I think
World Humanist Congress.
Yeah.
Where? YouTube or?
No, just Google World Humanist Congress,
Okay.
get the link, and you'll find the Soyinka speech there. It's fantastic.
How do you spell that?
Soyinka.
Soyinka.
Yeah, and he is given the Freedom of Expression Award for the year because of his own bravery in life. There were some young women. There was a poor woman who can't go back to Bangladesh, even to see her dying parent, you see, because of her criticism of stupidity and superstition. Taslima Nasreen.
Yes.
She got an award too.
Good.
It was an exciting Congress to see people who were standing up for freedom of expression and freedom of thought and freedom of speech and freedom of action. Now we say, well, we don't have to do that in America. We got free speech in America.
Not quite.
We've just removed a sergeant from the Air Force who would not
Under
use
God.
the proper words of saying under God.
Yeah. Or swearing.
Now, we do have an amendment to the Constitution which talks about Congress not doing certain things. And so eventually this will be in the courts. What our court will do, because our court is now, this particular court we have has now said you can have sectarian prayers in a public meeting.
Really?
The Greece, not Greece over there, but Greece, Massachusetts.
How can that be?
You tell me.
The Supreme Court allowed that?
And the Supreme Court allowed that.
I missed that one.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Yeah.
that's bad. Now, by the time people see this program, they may have looked up Kitcher Terry on YouTube and followed the 4 lectures.
Right.
But it will be out in print perhaps by the scheduled for October 28,
Yes.
2014.
Yes.
Life After Faith.
Life after faith, he calls it. And he talks there about, the four well-published and well-criticized atheist horsemen, as they're called, Dawkins and Hitchens and Harris and Dennett. They've been saying, well, three of them at least, if we could just get rid of religions, the world would be better. Well, anybody who thinks it's realistic in history to get rid of religions tomorrow or something, living in a different world. But they're making a particular case. Kitcher makes a different case. He talks about how religions do purify. They don't all have to oppose all of science.
Yeah.
Whether, it's with the old question of Copernicus and the sun going around or the earth going around, through Darwin, through vaccinations, we got a book already out called The Sixth Extinction. There have been 5 major extinctions.
Sixth extinction.
Yeah.
Humans?
Yes. By what we have done to the climate and what it will do to us. Now we've added to it by overpopulating too, and that's gets mixed into religious issues. But see, do we teach in schools, for instance, that 99% of the species that have evolved are extinct? Probably not. That violates almost all religious traditions.
99% of all species are now extinct.
Yeah.
And we may be the next.
We could be the next. We could be
Maybe
the next.
not quite the next, but
yeah. I remember that wonderful science fiction where they put a guy in a space capsule and sent him up for some centuries, and then he came back, you see, and he was wakened from his deep sleep, and the screws were being taken off, and what peered over into his little thing when it landed on Earth? A range of cockroaches.
oh, they came to dominate the earth.
Yeah, they came to dominate the Earth. Now, in a sense, that's science fiction, but
Yeah.
there are a few scientists who say today's science fiction is tomorrow's science.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the kind of critical thinking that says, hey, we are really alone on this earth. We can progress from, there's nothing we can progress to. We can progress from a harsh life to a less harsh life, or a life dominated by ignorance to a life, Kant's life, you see, focusing much more on intelligence. We have, where science has taken root, lengthened human life, reduced human pain. You could have a long list if you wanted to it.
This
Taught people how to control their families,
Yeah.
have intended children, or whatever word we use, planned families. These were all controversial, and still are in many parts of the world.
Yeah. Now, this brings to my mind, what is the role of religion in the modern world? It's quite different in Europe from the U.S. We have only about 5 minutes left.
Oh, and it's quite different in Northern Europe than in Southern Europe.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen that.
And why has that happened? And people are predicting when we were over there, here we were meeting in the various colleges of Oxford. They're scattered around in the town there, beautiful little buildings, and realizing that 100 years ago we couldn't have met in any of those buildings because only Church of England people could be here, you see. Even Quakers couldn't be here, and certainly no Unitarians here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have progressed from a certain kind of narrowness. Can we progress fast enough in our human values to avoid the extinction? Can we avoid? I don't want to think of how many nuclear weapons exist now in the world, and the chance of some of them falling into hands of people who will be impulsive go up quickly. Can we reduce that? Nobody talks about that anymore. Not seriously. We have allowed our middle class to be almost destroyed. Right here in America. Right here in America.
Yeah.
Now, how is Europe still different? Well, there's no single cause, of course. Everything's multiply caused. But one of the things was the separation of religion. Now, ironically, this is for me as one who's studied religions all his life, the best way to get rid of religion is to have a state religion, a single state religion.
Well, they have that.
Because then people, why am I paying money for this? You see, the hospital's better here, the secular hospital.
Yeah.
Most European countries had that.
Yeah.
Here in America, we had religious freedom, and therefore we had good capitalist competition and better marketing. And so
better marketing by
religions survive
yeah.
much better. Now, the American religions do various things.
Mega churches.
Yeah. Pick an issue. Pick an issue of racial segregation or of male dominance of women or of children's exposure to science. You see, on all of those, our religions are divided. Mm-hmm. And the map would be hard to make, although maps continually get made, you see, of where religion is weakest, is better in terms of value X, Y, and Z. But in Europe, this happened fast. The looking back at religious history and its bloodiness and saying we don't need that. You see, we can do science better in a secular college than a religious college. Mm-hmm. So that when you get into the Low Countries, Belgium, Holland, or when you get up into Scandinavia, this ought to be something people in Minnesota study. When you get into Scandinavia, you see, the church is, well, one of the phrases is three things happen in church. I'm trying to think of the right words here.
Funerals.
No. Hatching, matching, and dispatching.
Oh.
That's the usual phrase. And on two of these, people are carried in. It's the way I say, well, we keep the churches. They're kind of museums, and they register things. But we don't let them affect our schools. And the Scandinavian schools have a far better, any measure,
yeah.
They have the best schools in the world.
Well, and I hear that Norway has been graded to be the happiest people in the world.
That too. So the humanists of Norway were there singing secular hymns at this conference. It was fascinating to watch.
Yeah.
And most of us don't think much about Norway or Denmark, or we certainly don't think much about Finland.
Yeah.
And its school system, and why it's an honor to be a teacher in Finland, not in America. And we're paying a heavy price for it.
We are.
We have dropped down just in the industrial countries. We're near the bottom on any educational measure. Literacy, science, knowledge. Yeah. Culture, forget it. We don't have time for culture, you see, because we've got to think about vocation in our schools. And lately, we've been talking about the STEM courses, you see.
The science,
technology, engineering, mathematics. Those are the key things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're running out of time. It's about a minute left.
A minute left.
I think you're going to have to come back.
Well, let's go back to Aude Sapere.
Okay. You spoke earlier of the ledger of religions.
Yes.
Is there a comment about that you can make real quick?
Well, I think you have to go religion by religion, and you have to talk about when and where, what values did it serve, and what values did it oppose of these human values that got created.
Yeah.
Did it? W.E.B. Du Bois put it better, you see. Before the Civil War, every religion supported slavery. When the war was over, every religion said, we helped end it.
Yes.
They can't both be right.
And we're at the end.
Okay.
Thank you for tuning in.